Hey everyone, Chris Carter here from the North Shore Drive podcast. We got a lot to talk about. The Steelers take out Jalen Milroe for their official dinner visit during the draft process. We'll talk about that, what that means. Also, Aaron Rodgers not going to the Vikings. Does that mean he's going to the Steelers? And the new safety they added, are the Steelers done adding to their secondary in free agency in the draft? We'll talk about all that here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello, welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Ray Fittipaldo. We're your Steelers writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. They also do workers' compensation. Remember, when you call Edgar Snyder Associates, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Ray, let's talk about some of the big news. We'll get to Aaron Rodgers in a minute, but we had been wondering how serious the Steelers were going to take a look at quarterbacks in this draft process, and we did get at least a report from outside where the Steelers did take Jalen Milroe, the Alabama cornerback in this draft, to dinner. And there's now speculation like, hey, how interested would the Steelers be in Jalen Milroe? Now, Ray, we went to the combine. We've been following this process. This is not supposed to be a big quarterback year. Does this dinner change your mind as far as how the Steelers might be perceiving this quarterback class and if they'll take a swing at Jalen Milroe at some point?
No, I still think the Steelers can take a swing late day 2, early day 3 on the draft, especially, with this quarterback situation unresolved. But I think people should understand, Chris, next week the Steelers are going to go to Ohio State's Pro Day. And the night before, they're going to take Will Howard to dinner, okay? Mm-hmm. And they're probably not going to go to the Louisville Pro Day, but they brought Tyler Shuck in to Pittsburgh for a pre-draft visit about a week ago. So they are doing their due diligence on all these guys who are maybe 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round picks. So I fully expect them to do their homework on those guys. Does that mean they're going to draft one of them? I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if they do. The only thing that complicates that, and I was much more on board with drafting a quarterback, say, 2 weeks ago. Now it's kind of complicated, Chris. You trade away your 2nd round pick for DK Metcalf. That's one fewer pick than you have. You need a D lineman. You need a running back. You need a receiver, right? I don't want to say quarterback's a luxury in this draft, but, quarterback is kind of down on the list now, given those other needs, remain very much up in the air.
Absolutely. And here's the other thing. Like, I know people are going to see these dinners and these meetups, and they're going to, freak out all the time. But this is part of the process. Like, for example, early in the week, Jaden Higgins, the wide receiver at Iowa State, he was brought in for an official visit with the Steelers. They're doing it. This is the part of the long process of doing your due diligence. A few years ago when the Steelers were about to pick Kenny Pickett, they had a dinner with Malik Willis, and everyone thought that meant, the Steelers are going with Malik Willis in the draft. And they weren't. They were going for Kenny Pickett. And I think there's lots of things over this draft process that people are going to realize, like, hey, they're doing this. But when you step back and you look at the whole process, oh wow, they did that for several, a whole bunch of players that they're considering on day 1 or day two of the draft. And to your point, I think without a 2nd round pick, unless they trade back in the 1st round, it is hard to see them going for a quarterback on day 1 or day 2, because personally, I don't think any of these quarterbacks are worth a day 1 pick. Like, for anyone, you do up to like Jaxson, Dart, like maybe if Shedeur Sanders falls to 21, but even then, like, I'm like, you want that to be your franchise quarterback right now? I'm not sure how he translates to the NFL. And then but again, you could trade back, maybe you recoup a 3rd round pick if you trade back like, eight spots in the 1st round and draft towards the bottom of that. You could still land a Derek Harmon out of Oregon to get your D tackle. But without that, like, you want to have your day 1 and day 2 picks are going to be the guys that contribute sooner rather than later for the most part. So you want that to be your defensive tackle, because that's a big piece that they need to add. And then you got to question yourself, do you want that to be your running back? But if you draft a quarterback on day 2 of the draft, like say Jalen Milroe is available in the 3rd, that's a player that most likely Jalen Milroe is a project. Like, he's very raw. Like, there's certain things that you like about him in Alabama. He does have some athleticism to him. He can make some plays here and there, but he's going to take time to adjust to the NFL. And if that's the case, Ray, like, it's tough to see the Steelers spending at that point. Now, if he falls to the 4th round, then I think it's a little bit different, because you've at least gotten 2 guys that are contributing right now to or earlier to your roster on those picks. But that's why I just have a hard time seeing them drafting a quarterback that will ultimately probably be a backup quarterback this early in the draft this year.
Yeah, that's why it's important. And I know the Steelers were kind of in a different situation the first couple of years of Omar Khan's tenure as GM, but that's why it's important to have comp picks. If you look at the way the Ravens kind of manipulate the system, they could trade away a 2nd-round pick. They could have 3 third-round picks, because they're going to have 2 third-round comp picks almost every year, the way they construct their roster from year to year. Now, the Steelers are going to be set up that way in 2026. It's going to be really nice. If they want to move up and get a quarterback, they should be able to do it if that's in the cards. But it's also nice for these situations, right? When you trade away another pick, it's nice to have those comp picks in the bag. They don't have that this year. That's going to hurt them, unless, of course, they make another move. And I know we've talked in the past about, dealing George Pickens, and whether you want to do that now, you want to do that draft day, you want to do that at the trade deadline, or do you want to let him walk in free agency? And then at the very least, Chris, I think you get probably a 3rd-round comp pick for him, because there's going to be some team out there in free agency, no matter what goes down with George Pickens, that they're going to sign him to a nice contract that you're going to get rewarded in the comp system. So no matter what they do with George Pickens, I think you don't trade him for anything less than a 3rd-round pick, because that's going to be the return in 2026 if he does walk in free agency.
Exactly. And I mean, this year they're lining themselves up for a real good chance that next year they have good comp picks. Like, you look at Dan Moore, Najee Harris, Dante Jackson, Justin Fields. And we've talked about that a lot. But they're setting themselves up so next year that can be an advantage for them if they want to trade up and get the quarterback without, and still be able to keep some of their picks available on day 2 or early day 3 of the draft. That's an option that the Steelers have kept available to them, and I think that that's a good option that they've kept available to them for next year. But this year they don't have those, and so they're gonna have to make do with what they got, which is why I have a hard time seeing them make a move there. At that stage, unless they really believe in one of these guys. But again, all indications to me are the aligning of setting up themselves up, because it's not just that they let these guys go into free agency to get signed anywhere. It's the people that they've signed, because everyone that they've signed, not everyone, but most of the signings they've done, Darius Slay, if they even get Aaron Rodgers, the trade for DK Metcalf, none of that hurts their compensatory pick value formula for next year, because the players you sign in free agency that were let go into free agency and not cut, those will count against you in the formula and take away your potential comp picks for next year. So because they're aligning that, it really seems like to me they are making the push for next year to be the year that they go after a quarterback high in the NFL draft. So if you're planning on doing that, why would you also then try to spend early in this draft to just have 2 higher picked up quarterbacks when you still have so many other positions to address on your roster?
Yeah, I mean, there's 2 sides to that, right? You could do what the Patriots did. You could draft Drake May and Joe Milton in close proximity, and you hope one of them works out. Now they got Joe Milton, and they're trying to recoup some compensation for him, because they're going to go forward with Drake May. So yeah, maybe you take a flyer. Maybe, hey, what was Joe Milton, 6th-round pick? Maybe that guy works out for you, and it's a great pick, like Brock Purdy. Maybe that's how it went unfold. But also, there's the very real reality of what the Patriots are going through now. They're trying to get somebody to pay a 3rd-round price on Joe Milton, which is never going to happen. And now they're kind of, I don't want to say stuck with him, but they're probably going to have to take much lower compensation to recoup that draft pick.
Yeah, I agree there. There's gonna be some interesting things to develop there moving forward. But again, this draft process will continue to move along. We still have over a month before I think the draft even begins. So there's we'll be continuing to look at who the Steelers look at. Keep it here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, where you want to check in to learn about who the Steelers are talking to and to look at our big board of all the players that we've seen the Steelers just take a closer look at and where we rank them position by position. So with all that said, we got to talk about Aaron Rodgers because there is some Aaron Rodgers news on that front. They are moving a little bit closer, and what Cam Hayward said about Aaron Rodgers, I think, is interesting, and weighing in on that. We'll do all that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates, who also do workers' compensation. When you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatment's over? And who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. It's actually your insurance company's doctors. How does that make you feel? If the answer is not great and a bit insecure about what your fortune might be there, call Edgar Snyder and Associates today at 1-800-94-EDGAR, because they're going to fight for your workers' comp rights that you deserve and make sure that you're the one being considered in all the big options decided there. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. This episode is also brought to you by UFC Gym. Pittsburgh, are you ready to train like a champion? UFC Gym has everything for total body health under one roof. They have group classes from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Zumba, personal training, cardio, weights, cryotherapy, infrared saunas, and more, all for an unbeatable price. Not sure where to begin? All members get a starter session with an expert coach to help map out your fitness plan. Your first visit is on us. Drop in with free parking at Market Square or the waterfront and follow UFC Gym Pittsburgh on social media. Train different, feel unstoppable at UFC Gym. We're back here at the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the newest Aaron Rodgers developments. A report came out actually this morning on Wednesday that the Vikings were no longer considering Aaron Rodgers as a viable option in free agency, which now means that this decision supposedly is down to two teams for Aaron Rodgers, the Steelers or the Giants. But there's also that third decision that people have pointed out he could consider, which is retirement. Right. So looking at that, Ray, how does this impact your outlook as far as where things are for Aaron Rodgers and what he might actually end up doing for it right now?
Yeah, I mean, seemingly, Chris, you would think this could wrap up in days now instead of weeks. Although we should point out in that, I think it was Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network is the one who tweeted that update. He said the Vikings are not interested at this time. I mean, do with that whatever you want, but apparently he left the door open. He left the door open a little bit there for whatever reason. But yeah, I mean, at this point, if Aaron Rodgers really was holding out hope that the Vikings would be an option, it's really not that hard to decide between the Steelers or the Giants. I mean, you've mulled that for over a week now. The only thing that could be a hiccup in this process now is if he is truly contemplating retirement. And if he's doing that, Chris, I mean, this could drag on for days or even weeks, if that is truly the consideration. But yeah, I mean, if he wants to play, Steelers or Giants, pick your team and let's go.
No, yeah. I think that's the thing here. Now there's another thing that I think that comes with this too, is that, looking at how the situation plays out, if Aaron Rodgers was to decide, where he's going, we've heard the rumors that, the Giants are offering more money than the Steelers. Is that what it comes down to? Is it just, hey, do you want to get paid more to play for the Giants right now? They could, Brian Daboll was a recent coach of the year, and maybe people see him as an offensive-minded coach, but they also have been very bad of late. And you're probably, if you go there, he doesn't have to move. He can stay right where he's at in New York and, just switch to the different organization that's out there. Or does he want to go to the Steelers, who've made the playoffs in the last 5 years, who have, shown that, hey, they can be a competitive team at getting to the playoffs, being like second, challenging the first place team in their division. Whereas the Giants, I think if he goes there, he's going to get more of the same that he got at the New York Jets, maybe even worse, because the Jets at least had pieces around him. I'm not so sure that there's some great pieces around him in New York. So to me, I do think that that's a very clear cut, like, hey, why not make the decision? But hey, you know what, Ray? If I thought that way, if I was making decisions for Aaron Rodgers, I probably would have decided this already by this point. So who's to say that it is going to come in days at this point, because you feel like it should. But, I think everyone's tired of this, including Cam Hayward, who spoke out about this on his Not Just Football podcast just yesterday. And he didn't – I want to make sure we're clear about this here. There were some headlines that quotes that were put out there when the show went up, just to say like, oh man, either be a Steeler or don't, and they kind of put it very bluntly there. And look, he did say that, but he said that as part of the end of his answer about asking would he go on a darkness retreat to recruit Aaron Rodgers, which he was like, no, I wouldn't do that. But he also said that, like, hey, he has every right to negotiate how he wants to negotiate. I'm not saying that. Cam Hayward knows he was just holding in against the Steelers last year to get his bigger deal. So, I don't think that Cam Hayward was saying that, but I do think Cam Hayward reflected how a lot of people feel. It's like he said, I'm over this quarterback limbo stuff. Like, let's move on. Let's play some football. And so that I think that's the feel of a lot of Steelers fans, Ray. But I wonder, will the Steelers organization ever get impatient with how this process is going with Aaron Rodgers?
Yeah, you're right. You did have to listen to that podcast rather than read some of the quotes that were aggregated from it initially, because there's always context, to these situations. I thought it was interesting what Cam said. No one in the Steelers ownership group or front office or coaching staff has said anything. I don't think they want to step on the toes of Aaron Rodgers, who, reportedly is very sensitive and, reads a lot about, what's being said about him. But you're right. I think his views do reflect what the fan base is feeling. And there is a certain thing that, when you're a flagship franchise in the NFL, like the Steelers, or, pick whoever you want, Ravens, Chiefs now, there are certain teams that carry that weight, that it's a little bit strange that they're kind of in this situation where they're waiting on Aaron Rodgers to decide if they want to play for the Steelers or the Giants. The optics are not great on it. Now, the Steelers can change that at any time by moving on and, making another call. They're clearly invested in this process right now. But, I thought, Cam's, response yesterday, while not overtly strong, I think he said enough to get the point across that, the Steelers aren't a team that have to sit around and wait for you, Aaron Rodgers. We can be just fine with Mason Rudolph if that indeed turns out to be the case.
Which he also said, he said he's good with the locker room. People were excited to have him back, and he even said, like, hey, if he has to be the quarterback on day one, he's comfortable with that. And listen, Ray, like, I think everyone recognizes Mason Rudolph is not going to lead the Steelers to the promised land, but we've seen Mason Rudolph manage games for the Pittsburgh Steelers, give them a chance, against me. We saw him win 3 games in a row the last time he was in Pittsburgh to help them get to the playoffs. And granted, he didn't stand much of a chance when they went up against the Josh Allen in the playoffs, but he at least played well enough to take advantage of what the Steelers have. And with the Steelers additions at wide receiver, if the offensive line improves, maybe he could be in a position where you're just asked to do the bare minimum, and that's all he would need to become to get there. So I think that's certainly something to keep an eye on. But bottom line is, if you were looking for a resolution just yet, it hasn't happened. And with Aaron Rodgers, you can never tell when it's happened, which is why I still don't think it makes any sense for the Steelers to be waiting around for this. I think that even if you did get him, who's to say, like, he's doing this right now? Who's to say you and I, Ray, and we're Jerry and Brian, we're all at the facility in May waiting for OTAs to start, and then every day is asking, when's going to Aaron Rodgers show? Where's Aaron Rodgers going to show? When's going to Aaron Rodgers going to show up? And then if he does mandatory minicamp, when he skips that, like he skipped it for the Jets last year, it's like, okay, where's Aaron Rodgers? Then we're sitting there in July in waiting at Latrobe, and then he does show up, he's not practicing right away, and he's this is all leading to things that he's kind of shown he has a track record for. And that's why I get waiting around to see, like, hey, like, let's let a player figure out their process. What I don't get is when you see Aaron Rodgers' track record, why would you want to sign up for that, considering his talent level at this stage of his career?
Well, you would hope, Chris, that as Mike Tomlin goes through this dance and Art Rooney goes through this dance with Aaron Rodgers, you would hope that a lot of these things are hammered out before he signs that contract. Like, they can't tell him to go to OTAs because they're voluntary, but you got to show up for minicamp. And ideally, Aaron, new team, probably your last go around in the NFL, come in and work with our receivers in OTAs too. Let's be all in on this 2025 season for your sake, for our sake. We want you to go out a winner, and we want to get back to doing what we do in the playoffs. That's the pitch to Aaron Rodgers to make him want to be a part of the offseason program, if he does sign. But, obviously Aaron has to be on board with that. And as you noted last season with the Jets, that wasn't always the case.
Absolutely. When we come back, I want to talk about the Steelers' new addition at safety in Juan Thornhill and what that means for the future of the secondary. They've made now 3 additions with him, Eccles, and Slay in free agency, and what that might mean for how they build things forward. We'll do that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, remind you, this show is also brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They're your Mesothelioma and its bestest lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moonship Township, PA. Moonhonda.com is their website. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
We gave the all-electric Prologue EX class-leading passenger space. And we made its tech intuitive with Google built-in. Perhaps that's why we were named Best Overall EV and Hybrid Brand by Kelley Blue Book. It's nice when a dream comes together. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, we could keep talking about Aaron Rodgers all day, but we know what that situation is. As Jerry reported this morning, the Steelers have been told that they're not out of the running for Rodgers, but there's no specific time set for a decision. So that will continue to be that saga. And when something does happen here, come to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We'll give you all the insight as far as what led to the decision that was made. But Ray, let's talk about one decision that was made, and that was the addition of free agent safety Juan Thornhill to the secondary. Juan Thornhill coming to the Steelers from the Browns. He had played there. He had also played before that 4 years with the Kansas City Chiefs, where he was part of their Super Bowl championship teams and played a good part of their secondary in some of their better years. And personally, Ray, I see the move doing a couple things. One, again, I think this doesn't count against their compensatory pick formula because I believe he was cut. But 2, he is a safety that I think better fits kind of what they need at safety in being a guy that can play in deep coverage, whereas the guy that they let go into free agency, DeMonte KZ, wasn't always his best in that when he was playing deep safety. And if Juan Thornhill is the Steelers' third option at that position, that could offer them more flexibility of when and how they tell Minkah Fitzpatrick to go move around the field, because Minkah Fitzpatrick was their top option. DeShon Elliott's a strong safety that plays underneath, and DeMonte KZ is more of a hard-hitting safety than a deep safety that can play that. But Juan Thornhill, in my estimates, and when I've seen him and watched him, I watched him come out of college too. He looks like a guy that can allow Minkah Fitzpatrick to be more on the prowl because he can do that deep guy there. Is that a big addition, or is that just we'll see when we see it if that even works out?
Yeah, I mean, Chris, at the very least, he's 3 years younger than DeMonte KZ. KZ, I believe, 32. Thornhill is 29 years old. So you have, that going for you. And, I think you're right. The Steelers do like to deploy some 3 safety looks. And I think, much in the same way they have to be open to freeing up TJ Watt, moving him around the defense, they got to be open to the same thing with Minkah Fitzpatrick. They signed him to a $73 million contract, Chris, in 2022. That's back when he was turning the ball over, making game-changing plays with interceptions, forced fumbles, turnovers. But the last couple of years, there's been this trend in the NFL, 2 deep safety looks. We're going to limit the big plays. We're not going to let you, go down the field in 3 plays. We're going to force you to go down in 8 or 10 plays to kick a field goal or a touchdown. So that's a league-wide trend. The Steelers have fallen into line with that. But I think you're right. If the Steelers now can say, okay, Thornhill, go back there. You be the last line of defense. Minkah, we're going to move you up to the line of scrimmage. We're going to blitz you. We're going to fake blitz you. We're going to have you cover the slot. We're going to let you roam. I think those are all solutions that could potentially help the Steelers defense. Just like I mentioned, if they're open to that with TJ Watt, they could do the same thing with him, on the front.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do think that that's the other thing here is that, that flexibility is important for what the Steelers want to do on defense, because when you have to guess where people are, it makes it tougher to prepare for them. And that's what we've said that the Steelers needed to do for TJ Watt, was move him around the line. I think that's something they need to do with Minkah Fitzpatrick. It's good to let him be the free safety. But when you have the ability to move him around like they did, like if you remember that Bengals game at the start of the season where they had 5 turnovers in the first half, and Minkah Fitzpatrick had that big interception at the start of the game against Joe Burrow. That was a play where he went from looking like a deep safety to, what, I'm just covering this receiver right here, and if you throw that comeback pattern, I'm going to jump all over it, which he did. And it's those types of things that Minkah Fitzpatrick, I think, still brings to the table, that he was kind of limited in what he could do, because if it's one thing to do that and another team know, oh, hey, we can't really try the deep ball right now because that other safety is going to have that covered, and that's going to be throwing into some trouble. But when you know that, like, hey, like, you know what, I could take a shot against that guy because that guy's really more of a box safety. That's where I think the Steelers we're going to put themselves in a tough situation. But let's look at a bigger picture here too, Ray, when it comes to the secondary. You look at Thornhill, you look at Slay, you look at Brandon Echols. You got 3 guys that are veterans coming in, especially Thornhill and Slay, ton of experience on Super Bowl championship teams. And I wonder, is this secondary already upgraded enough to the point where the Steelers might not have to make any like day 1 or day 2 draft moves in the secondary, or even, address things further in free agency?
Yeah, I think day 3 at the earliest, right? Because if you look at their corner situation, you have 5 corners under contract. You have Joey Porter and Darius Slay as your projected starters. You have Corey Trice, who would be your top outside guy at this point. And you would have Beanie Bishop and Echols competing in the slot. And at some point, they're probably going to bring back James Pierre as their number 6 as a special teamer, right? They seem to do that almost every single year. So, you have 5 now, potentially 6 corners under contract going into the training camp. And now you definitely have your top 3 safeties. You got Miles Killebrew, who's not going anywhere this season. He's your special teams captain. He's, probably your goal line safety. They've used him in situations. So, yeah, listen, if you like a guy 4th, 5th, 6th round, yeah, go ahead, take him if he's high on your board, but you're not doing that on day 1 or day 2.
Yeah, I'm with you here. And I wonder, Ray, if the additions they've added here, Slay, a good, a long-time communicator, solid veteran. Cam Hayward talked about the positives of having him on the roster during his podcast as well. Had a lot of praises for him. But then also Thornhill. I can't speak too much to Echols and how he fits, but I look at when we talked about miscommunications and things that were wrong there in the secondary. Who were some of the guys we talked about? Well, we talked about Cam Sutton being part of that. We talked about DeMonte KZ being part of that. We talked about Dante Jackson being part of that. And there were other parties too, but linebackers and defensive backs, and those 3 names specifically, were involved in those situations a lot when the Steelers defense was out of position and there was a culprit to be pointed at. Who's now off the team? All 3 of those guys we mentioned, the linebackers coach Aaron Curry and the defensive backs coach Grady Brown. So clearly the Steelers said, all right, we're going to do some shuffling here. They brought back Gerald Alexander, who had been the team's safeties coach, or assistant secondary coach in years past. He's now the primary assistant, primary secondary coach. They have a new linebackers coach, and now they've switched all those 3 players out with at least 2 players that are more experienced at outside corner in Darius Slay compared to Dante Jackson, and Thornhill to KZ, not more experienced, but I think more talented as far as where they are in their career. And then Brandon Echols, I mean, I can't say that Echols would be better than Cam Sutton when he was in his prime, but I think it would be it's not a high bar for a player to be better than what Cam Sutton was for the Steelers last year.
Yeah. I agree with you. And, you look at the changes that were made there, I think they can be fruitful, but you also worry about last year, Chris, new guys coming in from established situation, like Patrick Queen was with the Ravens. He's now your communicator in the middle. DeShon Elliott, very strong-minded guy in the back end. It seemed like they were always involved in those miscommunications too. And, you just hope they're on the same page with all those new guys this year. That's the one thing about constantly changing out, your secondary or whatever room, your inside linebacker room the previous year. You hope those guys can get on the same page from a chemistry standpoint, but certainly at the very least, you got to be better communication-wise than what they were last year. That doesn't just involve the new guys. That involves Patrick Queen, Minkah Fitzpatrick, all those vets who have been around for a while as well.
Absolutely. Still lots to decide what's going to happen here with the Steelers moving forward. Still free agent money to spend. And the quarterback situation is a daily conversation as far as what will happen here. Who knows? Something might happen today. I doubt it. But we will keep you apprised with all of that at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com and here on the North Shore Drive podcast on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as our daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. From Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo, happy Wednesday. We'll see you again Friday here on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.